there, and welcome to yet another Second Line Book Club. My name is Draxtor, and today on the show, Roseanne A. Brown with her debut novel, A Song of Wraiths and Ruin, a sprawling, magical, young adult folk tale of sorts. Roseanne has her roots in Ghana. Well, actually, it's more than a folk tale. It's a folk epic. It's clocking in at I think 460 pages. There is corruption in a desert kingdom. There are bad deals with ancient spirits. There is a poor refugee boy with magical powers, and there's also a hyena that can sort of shapeshift into a griot. A griot is a storyteller that is walking around and telling their stories. And so before we introduce our esteemed guest today here in our desert tent, let's get a little taste of her work. And I would like to ask our own Shyla the Super Gecko, who is embodied as a little hyena, to join us here on stage. And there is a little book display.
Aww.
Yes, yes, very, very cute. And there's a book display just her size. So I would like Shyla to please read the very first page, chapter 1, page 1 of Roseanne A. Brown's Song of Wraiths and Ruin.
Abra, Abra, come and gather. A story is about to begin. The griot's voice warbled through the searching desert air, scorching desert air, cutting through the donkey pens and jeweled caravans that populated the tent settlement outside the city-state of Saharan's western gate. On instinct, Malik angled his body toward the storyteller's call, his grip tightening around the satchel strap slung across his chest. The griot was a stout woman, nearly a head shorter than Malik, with a face stretched wide in a tooth-bearing grin. Bone-white tattoos composed of symbols Malik could not understand swirled on every inch of her dark brown skin. Abra, Abra, come and gather. A story is about to begin. The steady rhythm of the djembe drum now accompanied the griot's call, and within minutes the sizable crowd had formed beneath the baobab tree where she stood. It was the perfect time for a story, too. That hour when dusk met night and the little sunlight that remained left the sky bright, but the world below dark. The audience sat on overturned crates and between worn carts, checking the heavens every few minutes for Bahai's comet, even though its arrival and the start of the festival of Solstitia were still hours away.
Thank you, Shyla. That's the page number 1 from A Song of Wraiths and Ruin, and it references a griot. And I was looking this up on Wikipedia. Griot is a West African historian, storyteller, praise singer, poet, or musician. And Roseanne is getting us into a groove here that really feels to me like I'm sitting at the campfire and I'm really drawn in by this master storyteller. So let's big warm welcome our guest, Roseanne A. Brown. Thank you so much for coming. How are you?
Oh God, I am doing good. I'm just like kind of sitting here like fangirling over the little hyena. Your avatar is so cute, Shyla. And it's just, it's always so fascinating hearing other people like read the words and just seeing someone else bring it to life, especially because it's so inspired by like oral telling. So it's always just such a fun experience for me.
This actually, it's interesting. Did people approach you or is there's no real tradition in the authors themselves recording their own audiobooks, right? That's really the exception from the rule.
Yeah, there's a couple like Elizabeth Acevedo. She does her own, but like she's a practiced like poet, so she does. Oftentimes with memoirs, you'll see people recording it, but that's because like that's their life, so it's a little different. But with fiction, yeah, it's pretty rare unless someone has like a performance background. They usually won't have them doing their audiobook.
Right. It does make sense. Now you could have had a hyena avatar, but you chose this one, and I'm assuming because we modeled it a little bit after the cover of the book, and we have the book here on the table so people can check it out. So I'm assuming that your embodiment here represents Crown Princess Karina from the book, right?
Yes, it does. That's Karina on the cover of the book, by model Tania Toussaint. And it's just, I think she was the character I most wanted to portray today, just because I feel like she's really sort of the face of the story, and she's one of the two protagonists. And it just felt right. Like if I was going to be anyone, I seriously considered if I should ask to be a flying toaster, but then I decided to go with Karina.
That is such a that would have been awesome because that is also a little bit of the cliche where people say like in Second Life you can be anything, you can be a flying toaster. um so your book is a young adult novel, and Ruby, who built the set, she put it here on our budget, put it together, um as much as we could. Of course, the scale of your book is a little bit bigger than what we have in terms of time and Linden dollars, but nonetheless, the book is about this festival that occurs every 50 years, called Solstasia, and then the book evolves in this sort of milieu, in this desert kingdom of Saharan. And if the camera could go back behind us, is actually the map of the continent of Sonande. That's the map that is in the front cover of the book, which is for me as a reader always the most awesome thing. If a book starts off with a map like this, I go like, that's a winner for me. And while the camera is zooming around a little bit, and camera can also go outside, take your time. Roseanne, I would like to ask you to set up the world a little bit. What is this world? Describe it a little bit. It's a desert. There are different parts. There are mountains, different cultures, big city that's kind of dominating. Take it where you will.
Got it. So I guess, as you mentioned, so I was born in Ghana. I was raised in America, right? And so because of that, sort of West African history, that was always sort of my go-to when I was thinking ancient world history. This is what I was most familiar with. And so when I started writing this book around 2016, and I was trying to kind of figure out like what's the setting going to be, like what do I want this to look like, I was decided I wanted to write something based on like the cultures I knew, right? But I didn't want to just do Ghana. Like I really wanted to do something that felt big and sprawling and epic, like kind of Lord of the Rings, Game of Thrones style, like something that had so many different factors in it. But I also knew like I didn't want to do the whole continent of Africa because that's like literally thousands of cultures and peoples. That was just too much to try and like fit into one book. So I decided, okay, then sort of the West African region, one of the regions it has the deepest history with is with the Sahara Desert, North Africa region, because that is obviously directly above it. So I narrowed it down to I want to focus on the Western Saharan corridor from the medieval ages around 11th, 12th century. And that was the main inspiration of this continent of Sonande. So as you mentioned, the sort of central power here is Zeran, which is this sort of desert territory that has, for the last 1,000 years, it's been the dominant power in this region. And part of how they've been able to dominate so thoroughly is simply their strategic location. By being in the desert, they are very difficult to conquer, and they can withstand a siege very well. And they just have the resources to sort of go out and like build up, consume, oh my gosh, words, consume other territories and just sort of keep slowly expanding from their central location.
They're basically they're basically a colonial power, and then in the book starts right away with, and I just saw the camera was zooming around, and again, I mean, we're in this desert area. There is some Ghanaian masks actually also on the wall, so we tried to take a few artifacts here from your culture, but what you were just mentioning, the setup of the book right away is about these refugees that are drawn towards the center, towards the city of Saharan, and like around the city are refugee camps of tons of people, right? Of different people that were driven from their lands.
Yes, like that's another thing I really wanted to kind of show there's this very big disconnect in the book, and we see this with the two protagonists. We see this with Karina, the princess. Like, she obviously lives a life of big wealth and privilege and status, and so we get to see sort of like through the festival, like just how opulent the wealth. And then you have Malik. He's an oppressed minority within. He's Eshran, and so that their people are from the mountains, and they have been very sort of they have been oppressed for centuries by the Zarani, taking advantage of their resources. And we see from the other side, we see sort of we see the people on whose backs this nation has been built, and kind of the people who are kind of have their faces pressed into the mud by Karina's people, and like showing that for like all the wealth and the pretty princess dresses and like all your favorite fantasy royal tropes and fantasy, like those are real people who kind of suffer for that to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And because I knew, like, as much as I love stories about royalty, like I'm a huge fan of Disney, that type of thing. Like the very idea of royalty and monarchy is very inherently unethical. The idea certain people just have a higher status than other people by birth, and that's just the way it is. So I really just want to explore that, like this idea, like, is there any way to ethically move through royalty? Like, what do you do when you're faced with this level of privilege? Like, how do you actually ethically use that? What happens when you've gotten all this power from very bad sources? One of the things Karina learns as she goes through the book and uncovers her family's history, she really learns the lengths her family went through to be in this position of privilege. And she starts to realize she doesn't actually agree with a lot of what they did. And so what then is her duty, as the fact that these are her ancestors, she's their descendant, but at the same time, they made choices that are morally repugnant to her.
You are transporting, and we're going to get to this because it's really fascinating how this is for young readers, and I said it before. What's fascinating to me as an adult reading, especially fantasy that are geared towards young adults, it's such a different world that is so much richer than the fantasy world when I grew up, when I basically had only Conan the Barbarian, where the main message was also the subtext, which was, if you look like Arnold Schwarzenegger, you just have to kill a bunch of bad guys, then you get the gold and the women, and boom, that's it. And you transport in this book all these themes, colonialism. Also, there's a mental health quote unquote angle that I want to get into.
Mm-hmm.
But to set the scene, and this is wonderful. Let's start with a little reading, because this ties into the issue of colonialism. So if I could ask you to stand up, and a book display will magically appear here in front of you, and then you can just stand up and walk towards it slowly. The excerpt that we're going to hear is about Malik, and Malik is a refugee from Eshran, and this is an area that's been exploited. Resources have been exploited. The population has been impoverished, and he comes with his two sisters. He calls himself Adil to disguise his origin, and he actually makes it into this competition that occurs every 50 years at this Solstasia event. And so because he's part of this competition, gets lots of respect. And in this scene that we're reading here, that we're hearing, Princess Karina is observing an interaction between Malik, or Adil as he's known, and a high government official, Mawale, who mistreats a servant that comes from Malik's home region. And so let's see how this plays out. Is there anything else? I think that's a pretty good setup. So we see this from Karina, the princess, point of view, as she.
But I don't work in the kitchen. If you give me a second, I can. Did I not give you an order? I'm already doing a task, and per your earlier instructions, sir, I'm not allowed in the kitchens. Let me find someone who can. Come here, boy. Really, I'm all right, said Adil, glancing between Wale, Omar, and the boy. I'm not hungry. I said, come here, the vizier repeated. The boy inched forward, hugging his pot so tightly that the veins crisscrossing his thin arms stood out in sharp relief against his dark skin. What's your name? Bwadi, sir. Well, Bwadi, I don't know what they teach you in that rat hole you call a home, but here in Zaran, we talk to our elders with respect. Bwadi's lip quivered, and Adil asked, is this really necessary? If you don't teach them their place at a young age, they'll never understand, said the vizier, as calmly as one might describe training a horse. Adil seemed to coil into himself, like a spring preparing to snap. The tug Karina had felt toward him during the second challenge returned, but she was too far away to do anything. Please, may I go? He cowered behind his pot. I was told to take this inside. You're free to go after you fetch us our food. But that's not what I do, the boy cried. Wale Omar's face contorted cruelly. You do whatever I tell you to do, you insolent. The man reared his hand back, and Karina barked at the captain to bring her ashore, just as someone yelled, Enough! In an instant, Adil grabbed the older man's wrist and jerked it back. Every person in the vicinity froze as Brady scampered off. Wale Omar wrenched his wrist from Adil's grasp with a snarl. What is the matter with you? You were about to strike a child. It's just some effing whelp. There are thousands of them swarming around Zaran. It was true that there had been an influx of refugees from Eshra in recent months. The reasons flying around for this were numerous. The river flu, the clan wars, Eshrans were simply lazy and trying to benefit from the wealth of Zaran without doing any work themselves. Karina didn't know what to believe. She had never actually spoken to an Eshran, so she did not know how bad things really were in the region. What if that had been your son someone had treated like that? Asked Adil. Don't you dare compare my children to one of them, warned Wale Omar. Why do you care so much about a damn keki? Adil's face contorted again before he dropped his gaze. I grew up in Talafree, he said, his voice cracking. Where I'm from, the Eshrans are no different from you or me. We treat them with respect, and they give us the same in return. Wale Omar's anger melted into condescension as he looked down at Adil. You have not been in Zaran long, but our relationship with the Eshrans is not the same. Whole packs of them have been pouring into the city, hoarding our resources for themselves. Plus, they bring with them no trade or skills, chimed in Driss. The Sun Champion leaned very obviously toward the Vizier, as if that might regain him his spot as the court's favorite. The last thing Zaran needs is more people who can't afford to take care of themselves. Maybe the Ashrams wouldn't be so poor if all their harvest didn't end up in Zarani pockets, argued Adil. Well, actually, drawled Driss, and Karina had never felt such a pointed desire to punch another person in her life. The population of Zaran is 1,000 times larger than every village in the mountains combined. The Ashrams produced more food than they can consume on their own, so it is only fair that the largest portion of it goes to us. Plus, the agreement through which we conduct our trade with them is perfectly legal. An agreement signed centuries ago under the threat of war hardly seems legal to me.
And that is Roseanne A. Brown reading from A Song of Wraiths and Ruin right here on the Second Life Book Club. Thank you so much, Roseanne. This is amazing because this interaction shows the type of argument that a colonial oppressor always uses, which is, well, you guys have a lot and you're also a little bit backwards. You should thank us that we're coming in and helping you to harvest your goods, and you also made a deal, and the deal is valid. And again, just to reiterate, this is seen through you go back and forth in the book between Malik and Karina from their point of view, and this is from the point of view of Karina, this very privileged young girl. I think she's 17 or so.
Yes.
And she's becoming the queen, and she is just realizing the incredible injustice that has been committed by her people. So this is brilliant. Talk a little bit about sneaking in these subject matters for young people. I mean, how is there a technique to it? Is there something where you make a list of issues, or say, okay, I want to weave those things in because they're important to me and they're important for society at large, and I'm trying to put that in there?
I think it was never so much about sneaking it in as much as this just felt baked into the premise, because I knew like the kind of story I wanted to tell. There was, especially because Karina and Malik are so far apart in class status and ethnic status, that there had to be scenes from both their point of views where we see like how this runs, like how their experiences are so different and how they both sort of act in moments when they're challenged by it. And so with Malik in particular, one thing I always found fascinating is sort of the trope of like the poor character pretends to be a rich person. Like you see this in Aladdin when he pretends the genie makes him a prince so he can win over the princess. And the whole thing, like Aladdin, the whole lesson of that's very simple. It's like be yourself, blah, 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 blah. But that always fascinated me because like what would it actually take? Like you are a person from this lower social status and you are pretending to be someone of a higher social status. Like what does that do to you? What then how then do you act in ways that are acting against your own best interests? Like, how does it take to sort of trying to make your way through that system? Like, Malik is doing this for a very good reason. He's trying to save his sister. He doesn't want to be pretending to be something he's not, but he has no choice. But then he comes to this moment here, like the smart thing to do, like he's jeopardizing his whole cover by getting involved here in the scene I just read. So like the smart thing for him to do would to say nothing. And of course we see the character, he's like, I don't care if the smart thing to do here is like, I should not get involved. Like I can't stand by and let one of my people be treated like this. And I really just kind of want to explore that, like how a lot of fiction makes it seem like it's just so easy to move between sort of, especially when you come from a marginalized background, to move between different identities or to kind of put that part of yourself away if it's something that's not visible, something like ethnicity or something like that.
I also think that the message in these kind of like, whatever, call them classic tales is highly problematic because it also basically has the message that if you adhere to this kind of norm, it's all good. And when you apply this to, for example, the discussion about refugees, I talk about this all the time here in Germany or the US, the same thing. There is this narrative of sort of the model refugee, the educated one that speaks languages that assimilates quickly, and that is very problematic if we sort of highlight these stories, as admirable as they may be, that you're learning two languages while you're in a refugee camp, and then you come in, hitting the ground running. That means that we reject people who just don't have that kind of stamina, right?
Definitely, yeah. And like that's definitely something. So I'm an immigrant myself, so I've not been a refugee, but the idea of sort of migration, displacement, that's something that has always just been a forefront of my mind. And like this idea that a lot of people just don't seem to understand. Like there's a quote, I can't remember who said this quote, but it's always stuck with me, which is that no one puts their child on a boat if they're not convinced that the boat is safer than the land. Like this idea, people don't really understand what it, like how bad things have to be for someone to decide that they're going to leave their life, everything they know, everything they believe in, like all of that, and pick it up and go somewhere else, like fully aware that wherever they're going probably doesn't want them there, just for the chance that things might be better. And that's part of sort of when I first started working on this book, the immigration topic. It's still big here in America, but it was being really big with the border at the time, 2016. And so it was partly the America-US border crisis, and then partly also the sort of refugee crisis from West Africa up through North Africa. That was the big one, sort of focusing on there, like just seeing the stories from people of like what they went through just for the chance to like have a better life, and like just very basic human demands and just the inhumane sort of conditions they were met with. And then people just justify it like, oh, we can treat them however we want because like, oh, but they technically broke the law, blah, 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 blah. And these are the same people who are like, oh, I'd do anything for my kids. Like, does this not count as anything? Like, just the chance for a better life. And so I think I just knew that, like, if I was going to engage in this trope and, like, take this character, I couldn't just have him, like, oh, he is essentially nobility now. He's pretending to be nobility and all the trauma and everything he's been through. And, like, the fact that he's, like, treated like a second-class citizen, all that just goes away. Like, I was like, no, I can't and I shouldn't do that.
I just threw up the map of Africa here in the back with a arrow pointing to Ghana, so that people get a little bit. We're educational programming, Roseanne. That's why we're exempt from some regulations here, which doesn't mean we can swear, but well, I guess we could, but we don't have to. This is interesting because you're first generation. When did you come to America? What age?
I was around 4 years old, so I was very, very young.
I was wondering, do you think this is what I was wondering when I was reading this, how different would the book have been if you would have stayed in Ghana? In other words, you kind of hinted at that earlier where you say, I want to throw in a little bit Lord of the Rings, Game of Thrones. I mean, this is not to say that these the big shows are not available in Ghana or other countries other than the U.S. But I'm wondering how much of how Americanized do you analyze yourself vis-a-vis if you could sort of envision yourself not being in America and being a writer in Ghana? How different would it have been?
See, that is a very tricky question to answer simply because like it's kind of like asking like I don't even know like if F. Scott Fitzgerald, his work is very based in America, right? If he'd been born in Germany, what would he look like? You know, like it's just such a fundamental life change. Like if I had stayed in Ghana, like I would have had a completely different life, and I think I still would have been a creative just because I'm a creative person by nature. But what I focus on might like realistically just be different, just because I'd have different things I care about, different factors, different things. Fantasy, I probably still would have been drawn to fantasy because I still would have had the oral storytelling and all that. But like maybe the kind of story as I was telling would be kind of different. Game of
But
Thrones.
you're
Oh yeah,
weaving in, you're basing. I mean, there's a lot of uh, Ghanaian and African um, parts of this story. I'm wondering if it would have been maybe more American. Sometimes I'm thinking if I hadn't gone to America, how would my output have changed? And I remember that when I was in my teens, I was actually obsessed with American culture. So there,
mhm.
in theory, maybe you would have been your output as a writer would have been more American than in America. I mean, this is a complete hypothetical. You know what I'm saying? Like because you're looking from the
Yeah,
outside in, and you may be looking at it in a more favorable light than you do now.
maybe. Or I also might have just not cared about America at all because I know there's lots of authors who never left the mainland who like are just because Africa itself is so big. Like a lot of thing, a lot of people tend to not realize is like the Sahara Desert alone is the same size as the continental U.S. Like Africa is huge, so like there's just so much happening that just rarely makes the because Africa only really makes the global news sphere when something bad's happening. So like just the day to day stuff most people never know about. So the majority of like African writers, like some of the best writers I know, like they're perfectly happy just writing about stuff happening over there. So I
Hmm.
honestly, I feel like if I had not left, I probably would still be a writer, but I'd just be more focused on like the more sort of rather than like history, maybe like the more sort of direct sort of things that would be most prominent to like a mainland audience and kind of talking about the issues like there because that audience, even if the Americans never heard about my work, the audience in Africa would be there, you know?
Hmm. Please remind me later that when I ask the question, I always ask, "What are you reading?" Please fire off if you have recommendations from your home country or other African countries, and maybe there's a site or so where there is maybe a little curation that we can get some recommendations. Uh, Now the tradition here, what's I said this earlier. I know Panny says here in the local chat, American culture. What's that? Chuckles. Well, that's a big question.
Yeah.
American
Yep.
culture is a mix of all the people who came in. What I meant by American culture was the dominating popular culture that is almost synonymous with Hollywood.
Yeah. Yeah. American pop culture. I got you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
which is just dominant. I mean, people when I came to America, they couldn't believe how uh, I was knowledgeable in certain things, and I think people who never leave America, I mean, that may have changed in the last 20 years. They're not aware how dominant that is all over the world, and how a lot of
Hmm.
people still think everybody lives in a killer Manhattan apartment.
Hmm.
Every Everybody does.
Yep. It's true. It's true. And they're so expensive. Like you see something like Sex in the City, and you're just like, wow, everyone in New York can afford something like that. No, no, they cannot.
Yep, yep. Uh, Now you put a lot of uh, traditional elements in this story, and what I was really fascinated with also is that the tradition in your country and in other African countries is it feels so much richer to me. I grew up with Hansel and Gretel, and it's really kind of
Hmm.
black and white. I mean, what is that a sense that you would say that there is more nuance in traditional folk tales from the African continent?
I'm not sure if nuance is the way I'd say it. I think a part of it is to Western audiences. I think because every culture has its own folkloric aspects, right? And it has its own myth making and it has its own creation. But the thing is, for those of us in the West, we're so used to the American, not American, sorry, like the Western Euro sort of standard folklore and myth, like you said, Hansel and Gretel, Snow White, Cinderella, like the ones that have been sort of canonized and then bastardized and then like adapted a million times with Disney and all that. And so we know them inside and out, right? And so that means when you get to other folkloric stories from other cultures, they feel so much newer, you know? And so I think it might be that newness because, like, I definitely like the only reason I'm saying this is because, like, there's so much scholarly work done on, like, Grimm tales and, like, Hans Christian Andersen and, like, the deep sort of messages and, like, morals and, like, the reflections of culture at the time in those myths
Mhm.
and stories, right? But that same level of work hasn't been done on books, on folklores and myths from other cultures. And there's a lot of reasons for this: colonialism, imperialism, the records were lost, all this. And so I think it can be a lot of it that a sort of we see something like Cinderella and it's been broken down to its barest elements. Like we know that story just so well inside and out every angle that it almost feels very trite. And then you take something like the Nancy story from Ghana or the Epic of Sundiata Keita or Mansa Musa, these histories, and because it's so new, it feels like there's still so much more to discover, you know? And there's so much to unpack from it and so much to take from it just because like it feels to us like unmined territory.
That is a good point. I would still say though, even just everything. I have a bunch of books of African folk tales, and there is to me
Mm-hmm.
just more moral ambiguity than in
Mm-hmm.
Hansel and Gretel, because Hansel and Gretel is, it's the bad evil stepmother, and then the kids, and I mean, I'm simplifying it, and I'm also not a scholar, but that's how I perceive it.
Mm-hmm.
And then I have all these other sort of books, and we have a book of Hawaiian. My wife's from Hawaii, so we have a bunch of books from the Hawaiian um, fairy tales and folk tales, and they just more interesting to me. But you're right. Maybe that's
Mm-hmm.
because I'm personally just too saturated with the German stuff. But the question is,
Mm-hmm.
so I'm talking about moral ambiguity more than nuance, I guess. But my
Okay.
question to you
Okay.
also is the tradition. Do you feel, because I really feel that this book could be, it's like something that it's something that can really stay, that has
Mm-hmm.
staying power. And when we sometimes think about Hansel and Gretel, or anything Brothers Grimm related. I mean, these guys were just riffing on stuff that was out there. They did not
Mm-hmm.
invent this full cloth, and so they changed stuff. My question is, were you did you feel pressured to adhere to some sort of tradition or something, to be pure,
I
like a purist type thing?
I think at first I definitely when it came to being pure for me, it was more like being culturally accurate because I'm always very
Yeah.
aware of sort of stereotypical depictions of Africa, right? And like aware that so much of the fiction that comes out in the West features all these sort of prejudiced, bigoted, hateful sort of depictions and not wanting to repeat that with my own work. So that was sort of my biggest fear there. But as for the actual sort of the storytelling craft creative side of it, it was more like because like I know so well though, like the whole way oral history works is just by nature. Every story, like when it gets passed from one storyteller to another, it changes just a little bit because no two people will tell a story the same way.
Mhm.
It's just like there is just a lot of freedom there and understanding that like things are just going to change. And like that itself is part of the story. Like this idea that like two people will take the same story and come with a completely different endings. So in that sense, I felt a lot
Mm.
of freedom drawing from that sort of cultural well of just being able to be like, look, this is the way I'm going to interpret this. And some people aren't going to like it, and some people are going to be wrong. And you know what? They're going to be right. And where some people are going to think it's wrong, and they're right to think it's wrong because they're fair to be like, okay, but I would have done it this way. And I'm like, you know what? The way you would have done it would have been right too. You know.
Mhm. Mhm.
So in that sense, I felt I had a lot of freedom.
You mentioned Anansi, and thankfully we have a slide prepared, courtesy of Shyla, who looked into some of the stuff. And Anansi is behind us on the big board. It's a very, very interesting spider type figure. There's, I think, even the children's show, and he's smoking some weed, I guess, in this illustration that we have. And he's the god of all knowledge of stories, a trickster. Anansi defeats stronger foes with his resourceful wits. Anansi tales often deal with turning failings into virtues. But Anansi is not in your book. I just want to make that clear. Just
Oh yeah,
because
no,
you
he's
mentioned
not.
but it's a ubiquitous character. So was that something where you go like, nah,
Yeah.
I don't have to bring him into the story. I'll rather take the hyena.
Yeah, the thing is though, Hyena is very clearly based off Anansi because of the idea of the
Ah,
trickster god.
yeah,
Because
that's what
Anansi,
they
like the
have
thing,
similar roles, right? Because like, yeah, go ahead.
yeah, because Anansi, he like even though like he has an important role all through the diaspora, like he started with the Akan like people of Ghana. Like literally in my language, we have something called Anansisem, which is literally like Anansi stories. Like even though stories that aren't about him, but like his name is tied to him because it's so ubiquitous to our culture. So like the idea of the trickster figure, a person who is not good or bad, but who just simply is, and like who exists sort of like the thing about Anansi, even though he sort of gets known as a god and like he sort of evolved into a god traditionally, he wasn't really a god. He was kind of outside of all of that. And so he existed outside the realm of gods and spirits and humans and like in his own sort of rules. And even though I knew I didn't want to use Anansi specifically, simply because it's not our world, so their world wouldn't have Anansi, it was like
Mhm.
I wanted to honor that idea, the idea of a figure who exists outside of morality in the way we think about it. And so
Mhm.
that became Hyena, this idea. And especially because like the spider is just so symbolic, like the web, the way the spider is just the master of their web. And so I was thinking like, okay, what other creatures have invoke very strong sort of images and emotions? I'm like, hyenas, they're always prowling, they're always smiling, and the way they're laughing, like Hyena in the book, like she is just always laughing because she always knows something the characters don't know. Malik and Karina just don't know. So she's just always laughing and it's very unsettling. And so it was sort of a way to pay homage to the idea of what Anansi represents without using Anansi.
Mm. And we actually have another excerpt here, and I have a slide in the back. The hyena, the hyena
Mhm.
plays a big role. So there's a slide in the back, and the second excerpt that I would love you to read is actually has to do with storytelling within a story, because Adil, his hidden name, Malik, the champion, he is here in the second challenge of this big competition in this festival. Solstasia. My God, I can't even pronounce it.
So Solstaja, you had it right the
Sol,
first time. Solstaja.
Solstasia. Yes, and so Malik decides in this challenge to frame it around telling a story about
Mhm.
hyena. And it's also important to know that Malik discovers, well, he knew this. He had these hallucinations from early on, and we'll talk right after this reading what this sort of represents in the story. But basically, he sees these raves. He sees dark black figures that scare him, and he sometimes can control them, and then they disappear. But later in the story, he realizes that he can basically conjure up things through his imagination,
Mhm.
and other people can see it too. So in this very challenge, oh yeah, and Roseanne, now you have to go forward and click on the book stand
Oh
so
yeah.
that, and
Oh, I know.
you
I was
can
just
read.
waiting. I was
The
waiting
big
for your introduction. I know. I got you.
the, the big book stand has magically appeared, because you can't
Mhm.
spell imagination without magi.
Mhm.
Uh, um, yeah, this is an excerpt where champion Adil Malik is performing his second challenge. Um, and let's take it from there. He's conjuring up all sorts of weird things.
Hyena was searching for a place to sleep when someone bumped into her. After exchanging apologies, she kept walking until she noticed her bag was missing. Realizing there could only be one culprit, Hyena ran after the thief to regain what was rightfully hers.
Sorry to interrupt real
As
quick. I want to set the stage a little bit more precisely. This is Malik talking. He's on stage. He's surrounded by, I think, thousands of people in this place, and he is telling a story. So this is part of the challenge where he is in this competition, and he's trying to win the challenge by telling a compelling story about Hyena, and everybody knows Hyena as this ubiquitous um, folkloric hero. Sorry, go ahead.
Yes. As Adil stalked up and down the stage, the world seemed to transform around him. Karina could almost see the golden sands in place of the wooden stage and an ancient market bustling with life. A crowd gathered to watch Hyena fight with the young man. Throughout the ordeal, the thief kept crying, "Help! Help! She is trying to steal my bag!" Karina shook her head several times. She could feel Fareed seated beside her, yet she could also feel the crowd pushing around her to witness the fight, hear the screaming accusations, and even smell the fragrant cardamom and cinnamon sold in the market. Eventually, the two were brought before a judge to settle the matter. However, before Hyena could state her case, the thief burst into tears and cried, "Oh, wise judge, I swear on my mother's grave that this bag and everything in it belongs to me." Hyena was outraged. Who was this obstinate young man who lied so easily? She drew herself up and said, "O wise and merciful judge, I swear to you on my life and the Sultana's life and the life of every bird that has ever flown through the heavens and every fish that swims in every sea, that this bag is my bag." Adil's voice changed with every character he added to the story. Completely spellbound, the audience drank in his every word. The judge said, "The true owner of this bag should be able to tell us exactly what lies within." At this, the thief stepped forward and said, "In the name of the Great Mother, I swear to you there is nothing in this bag but 4 old socks and half a broken lamp, the east wing of a library, and 15 dancing girls, a team of wise men, a pack of camels made of solid gold, enough olives to feed the Sultana for 6 years, the tears of a bride's mother on her wedding day, my grandfather's favorite cloak, and a whole flock of snow white doves who will swear to you that this bag is my bag." Each of the wonders sprang forth from the actual bag in Adil's hands. Dancing girls emerged with trailing veils softer than sunlight, followed by cooing doves and riches that shined the way only items in a dream could. Karina laughed in delight as a dove flew by. Not to be outdone, Hyena stepped forward and said, "Oh, but how he lies! The actual contents of this bag, which is my bag, are every nasty thought you've ever had. A flying carpet with silver tassels, an argan tree full of goats, a shepherd trying to wrangle those goats, 4 casks of wine made from the sweetest grapes, the smallest boat you've ever seen, a chorus of children who only know one song, a master cobbler in his workshop, 27 copper plates, 36 lit candles that will never go out, the Great Mother's left shoe, and a leather-bound tome listing all the ways this bag is really my bag." It was like watching a symphony come to life. Each new item from the bag, another note added to the melody. Something pranced by Karina's box. An ice bear with a pelt white as snow, who growled warmly at her as it passed. A creature one would never find in the desert. This wasn't just a story. It was a glimpse into another world. Adil must have pulled the audience into a trance-like state, like the traditional musicians who could hypnotize through song. And now they were seeing things that couldn't be. Karina knew it wasn't real, yet she didn't care. She couldn't take her eyes off the boy who had created this marvelous illusion.
And that's from A Song of Wraiths and Ruin here on the Second Life Book Club. Roseanne A. Brown reading. Big round of applause. And yeah, this is Malik, aka Adil, conjuring up a story from a little bag that he got. So the challenge was actually to come up with something based on a prop. So people were given a prop. It's almost like an improv class, I guess. I mean, it's really brilliant that this is a challenge, Roseanne. I mean, it's I was like, when I was at that section, I was like, this is so brilliant. And here we can see how he just is able to use this affliction of seeing things, hallucinations, use it to his advantage. So I want to ask you actually, and there's a lot of really good comments and questions in the chat, and I will not ignore them. Please copy and paste them so that they don't run by. But I want to ask you first before I get to the audience questions here. The theme of mental illness is here in the subtext a little bit, or at
Hmm.
least a form of anxiety that is that is really an issue for Malik,
Hmm.
right? Or am I interpreting too much?
Mm. Yes. So with Malik, the anxiety Malik deals with, that's something that's very personal to me because as I was working with the book, it was the first time in my life I was kind of dealing with my own mental health and mental illness issues back in 2016. And so the book actually kind of started as a way for me to sort of explore that on the page because I realized, like, as much as I had loved fantasy and I loved reading about it, I had never read a book where sort of a character's mental illness, it wasn't either like a metaphor, like when they got anxious, they shot lightning, or they weren't villainized. We see this a lot in Disney, like the very
Right.
clearly mentally ill character is the villain. So I want to show a character like it's not a metaphor. Like it's not like Malik, his magic's a metaphor for his anxiety. Like he has anxiety and he has magic, and they both sort of play off each other. Like we definitely see him tend to lose up more control when he's at his most anxious, but like they're not a substitute for each other. And I
Mhm.
really want to show him being a hero. Like I didn't want this to be something that defined him. I didn't want this to be something like it's also not something ignored. Like there's definitely moments where his anxiety gets in the way, and there are moments where like he can't do sort of the big heroic thing because he's having a literal panic attack. And so I
Mhm.
definitely wanted like what would a hero like suffering with what we would consider a generalized anxiety disorder, what would that actually look like in a fantasy world? And how then would they be able to navigate that and still be a hero when a lot of the things we traditionally consider to be a hero would be closed off to them?
But isn't it in popular culture, and I know I just say this to antagonize Panny here in the audience, American culture, also a little bit of a trope of someone who overcomes their um, awkward. I mean, there's a difference between being awkward and having some mild anxiety to full blown mental illness. And I mean, I'm not here to judge what's where the gradient is, where you should say, you know
Mhm.
what, this is, why don't you pull yourself together versus you got to go talk to someone. I mean,
Mhm.
that's a that would be a fallacy for anyone to judge someone else's burden, or the
Mhm.
how debilitating that is. That's not for us from the outside to judge. But in popular culture, I do see that quite often. It kind of annoys me that then uh, the awkward shy person gets all these superpowers. I mean, this is not, it's not the same thing. I'm not, you know what I'm
Mhm.
saying, Roseanne. I'm not
Mhm.
saying that Malik is a stereotypical character. Not at all. He's
Mhm.
incredibly rich. But I do have to say there are people in popular culture who have issues, and then they always seem to overcome them with some sort of weird superpower.
Yeah, definitely the magical cure trope. And I hate that trope so much because I feel like it basically is telling like disabled readers, readers suffering mental illness, like neurodivergent readers, it's saying you only
Yeah.
get to be the hero. Like if you, this fundamental part of your identity, whether you embrace it or not, like a thing that makes you, if this goes away, you get to be a hero. And it's like, that's just not how the real world works.
Yeah.
So that's why it was so important to me to like defy that trope. Like Malik, he never actually like his anxiety doesn't get better. Like by the end of the book, he's still having panic attacks. He's still freaking out. It's more like his ability to manage it gets better. Like we see him sort of
That's it.
coping with it better.
Yeah.
So like they don't actually go away, but like his ability to deal with it gets better. Because I want to show that, like, especially because this is still a book for young readers. So like it's really important to me to like give young readers hope. Like I don't want to just be like everything's awful, bye. But like, so I didn't want to lie to them. Like, oh, one day you'll wake up and everything will be fine and you'll feel perfectly fine 100% of the time, because that's not realistic. But like, what is more realistic is like you're going to find better coping mechanisms for the things that ail you than you have now. Because I know that was my experience as a teen. Like when I look back on how I felt, like the biggest difference between them and now is that like the emotions and like the very low mental low spirals are still there, but my ability to cope with them are way better than when I was a teenager.
Was that something that came to the fore with? I mean, you kind of hinted at that. 2016 was difficult for a lot of people for a variety of reasons. One chiefly among them in terms of America, but and the world,
Mhm.
I may add. But what was it? something that was when you were confronting with this task to write something of this sort of scope, that that contributed to heightening it, but also to force you to confront it. I mean, in other words, the writing, did it exacerbate it, and or both heal you?
I think it was definitely very cathartic. Writing has always been very cathartic for me. And there are some moments, like there's a moment towards the end where sort of Malik sort of, I don't want to spoil it for anyone, but like he kind of has to confront his own mind and he gets kind of very deep into his own neuroses. And that one was a very hard scene to write. I remember just kind of walking away from that scene and just kind of being out of it the whole day because like I really mind deep like what are some of the worst thoughts a person can have about themselves and trying to put that on the page. But in general, I think it was just very cathartic because of the entire time, even when I was digging deep like that and putting like a lot of pain on the page, I was all in service of like I've never seen a hero like who I felt their mind work like my mind worked, and especially not in a black character. That's something that's still just so something we just don't see a lot because there's just still so few fantasies centered on black characters, and like
Mhm.
just the sort of how mental health manifests in the black community, especially with black boys, something we just don't see talked about. So like getting to know like I was doing something that was so important to me, it helped what might have been like sort of more draining. It helped make it feel like more like this is kind of worth the stress it's putting on me.
Matter of fact, you actually write, you dedicate this to your mom and dad, and you say in the beginning here of the dedication, for every black child that's wondered if they're enough, you are. And maybe in the
Mm-hmm.
post game, we can talk a little bit about when we're just here among us and not streaming. I don't want to probe people too much about their issues unless they volunteer that. I'm always, of course, very interested working with people in with mental illness and people with neurodivergence and disability in my other work. So this is a topic that interests me. So we'll touch on that in the post game. I want to go through a few of the comments here, and this is such a wonderful hour. The hour passes so fast, it's just insane. We need to make this a 3 hour program. What's going on? Shiloh says here in the chat, trickster stories are used in Native American cultures to modify behavior, teach about values and core identity among indigenous cultures. I think it's very interesting, intriguing that you have incorporated a hyena in your story. Excellent idea. Are there similar trickster figures in Ghanaian culture and storytelling, or among African storytelling, that you're aware of? I mean, we mentioned Anansi. Um,
Yeah, Anansi's the big one.
yeah,
Yeah, he's probably the biggest one, Anansi.
uh,
Um, I know other cultures definitely. I don't have anyone off the top of my head. I'm sorry, just because Anansi is like I could talk for a long time about Anansi, but that's just because Anansi, like that's specifically my culture. I know I can't speak too much for other cultures, but I know the idea of the trickster shows up a lot. And you're right, like the trickster is a great way of showing values, and like it's what's super important is a trickster is like they're not always right, they're not always wrong. Like there's stories of Anansi where like
eh,
the listeners. Oh, sorry.
no, no, no. I'm sorry, but precisely because the hyena, and I think that's clear. Maybe even the excerpts, because the hyena is also pushing our heroes in your story, or Malik specifically, into the right direction. Right? He kind of
Mhm.
tests him a little bit here and there, and ultimately he's a positive force in his life.
Yeah, Hyena, she has her own agenda. And it's just like the idea that like sometimes like when you're listening to a Nazi story, sometimes you're supposed to be on a Nazi side and sometimes you're supposed to be against him. And like the idea that like the trickster, like just their role is very fluid and like they kind of fulfill whatever role they need to fulfill, they fulfill it. So I think, yeah, and I think we see that in a lot of cultures around the world simply because like it's just something that's so easy to pass on and easy to understand and like a sort of universal motif.
Well, I'll tell you in what culture you don't see that, and I said it earlier, the German culture. The only person who tells us what to do is the bad evil witch is going to put you in the oven if you don't behave. Actually, your bad mother will throw you out and put you in harm's way first, and then and then the evil witch will do something to you. Let me not get don't get me started about Struvel, Peter. We'll have a special show about that where the guy comes, and if you suck your thumb, then your mother will send a guy who is cutting off your fingers. Yeah, yeah, we tell
You know
that
what?
to our
you,
children.
you gotta take that up with the ancient Germans. I can't help you with that.
Yeah, I mean, those are my own issues that I know. You're not. I didn't book you to be my therapist here. I can't afford you. Um, Deb Cortis is actually asking. I mean, you said this. I haven't seen many more fantasy books about African culture or with African characters, black characters for that matter. Can you recommend some apart from your own? Yeah, that would be very cool. And then maybe you can just put it in the chat, and we can also do this post game and put it on the podcast. But whatever you can recommend. Fantasy books, and I mean, I have no idea if on the African continent there is a rich uh culture of current fantasy writers. This is something that is really bugging me that I'm not um exposed to that. I mean, we have several African authors booked for the book club. We have a huge show in August with 5 authors from Africa, and
Mhm.
then in October 2 more. But wonderful! Roseanne is putting stuff here in the local chat. Awesome. The Gilded Ones by Namina Forna and Ray Bearer by Jordan Ifueko. And yes, and please check out the book club
Awesome.
calendar as well, because we have a bunch coming. Shyla says here in the chat, every yeah, that everyone. Oh, Nietzsche actually says the tropes have been so overused, referring to the tropes of overcoming with your superpowers. Shyla says the tropes of everyone with challenges, physical, mental, emotional, can be a hero without having to be magically fixed, which is so unrealistic. Now we're running
Mhm.
out of time, so I would like to have we have a third reading, and we'll keep it maybe for the post game, or I guess
Mhm.
our producer, can we go over a little bit? Yes, we can. Okay, let's do the third reading, because the third
Okay.
reading is also magical. Here is uh, Afua, which is the 12-year-old daughter of an ambassador, and she mentions in passing the term Nkra to Karina, our princess. And Karina, actually, we didn't mention that, wants to bring back her mother from the dead.
Oh
So
yeah, yeah.
uh, there's a lot of scary stuff there, man. Oh man. And so she comes across a an old book, and we actually made a prop, or Ruby made the book is here on the table,
Mhm.
and it has a recipe in it how to bring back people from the dead, and the term "nkra" is mentioned, and Karina is so aggrieved that she wants to is grieving that she wants to bring back her mother, and she hears Afua mention this term, and then she approaches Afua because of her mentioning that, and then Karina is exposed to some magic. And we also should say that the characters in the beginning, they're both being raised with basically, you know, the logic of a world is you see is what you get, and there is no such thing as magic, which I also find pretty cool. And then all of a sudden they go like, "Wait a minute, our parents have been lying to us,
Yeah,
right,
pretty much.
Roseanne?" That's really
Yeah, pretty.
that's the subtitle of your book, the subliminal message: the parents are lying, right?
Mhm. Yeah, I feel like a lot of kids have that moment, like just that moment you realize something you just assumed was the truth, and you just realize, oh, someone just made that up. But
Yeah,
yeah, in this world, there's definitely a reason, sort of like the magical world has just, it's not like magic went away, it was always there, but just sort of hid itself like away. But okay, so let me read this real fast. And you want
don't
me to still
don't
read
don't
both?
rush. We have plenty of time. I'm just, we're you're the guest here. I don't want to rush you. So here, as we set it up, here's Afua. Karina is going to Afua, and Afua, 12-year-old girl. Yeah, she puts her on the spot. Tell me what this and cry is all about. And go ahead.
Okay, all right. Hi, how have you been? Why are you here? Did you bring my goat skin? I've been better. I have a question for you. And no. Karina made a mental note to send someone to buy Efwa a new goat skin and also a pony for her trouble. Everyone loved a gift pony. I have a favor to ask, but before that, what do you know about Nkra? Efwa gave an unconvincing laugh and looked everywhere but at Karina's face. Never heard of it. Yes, you have, Karina insisted, and Efwa squirmed in the usual dance of a child caught in a lie. You said it to me the night of the comet viewing. Aside from them, the only other place I've seen the word Nkra is in a book titled The Tome of the Dearly Departed. Karina had been prepared to give a long list of reasons why Efwa should help her. She had not been prepared for the way the girl shrieked at the mere mention of the tome. So you've heard of that book before? Asked Karina. Is it dangerous? After making a gesture to ward off evil, Efwa replied, Of course I've heard of the Tome of the Dearly Departed. It's only the most thorough record of the Yoraji Talra in all existence. Nobody has seen it for 1,000 years. Well, now Karina felt extra bad that she'd accidentally dropped the book down a gorge. She'd also sat on it at least twice before that. Oh, whoops. Plus, there was that name again. The Yoraji Talra her mother had told her about. The sorcerers who had worked for the Kenwan pharaohs. If the book was a record of their spells, then perhaps it was truer than she realized. Do the Yoraji Talra have something to do with Nkra? What is it? When Efwa shook her head instead of answering, Karina added, I promise, anything you say tonight will be kept between us. Blessed Aranko, oh, the evil this girl has brought to my house. Efwa moaned and made a gesture to ward off malice. No, I don't like it. How do you even know about magic? I'm a princess. Knowing secrets comes with the job. It was clear Karina was going to need a different tactic if she hoped to get information out of this girl. With an exaggerated sigh, she straightened up. You know what? Never mind. I shouldn't have expected a child to know anything about magic. Efwa's face switched from apprehension to pure indignation. I know about magic. I'm sure you do, but clearly not enough to help me. Karina waved a dismissive hand. Don't worry, I'll find someone with the skills I need. You go back to playing in the mud or whatever it is children do for fun these days. This was low, even for Karina, but she couldn't bring herself to feel guilty because as she began to walk away, Efra replied, I can do it. I can help you. But can I at least know why you're asking? It would have been easy enough for Karina to lie, and perhaps it would have been safest to. But before she could stop herself, she blurted out, My mother has died. It was the first time she had shared the news with someone who did not already know, and she forced herself to remain upright as Efwa's face twisted with shock. Oh. The girl pressed her palm against her chest. May the Great Mother guide her to the place with many stars. Thank you, and I trust you will keep this knowledge to yourself. There was information in the tome that could help me solve the mystery of her death, but I don't have it with me anymore. Aid me in this, and you will always have a friend within Kasar Alahari. Karina decided against mentioning which technique from the book she wished to try. No doubt Efwa would be less than willing to aid her if she knew they were dabbling in necromancy. Efwa paused, and for a terrifying moment, Karina sensed the girl was going to refuse her once again. However, something bright and wild filled her eyes. I can help you, but not out here. This way. After muttering something to the guard, Efwa gestured for Karina to follow her into the tent. Without any hesitation, Karina dropped to her knees and crawled in after Efwa, and the world faded to nothing behind her. The sounds of River Market disappeared into the night, and a shiver ran down Karina's spine, though the feeling was not wholly unpleasant. Just as she began to fear she had made a horrible mistake, she emerged into a world of starlight and greenery. Trees stretched in every direction, the canopy around them so tall it seemed to brush against the constellations overhead. The air was laden with moisture, and within minutes sweat rolled down Karina's neck. The soft cries of cicadas, hooting owls, and other night beats filled the air as Effa led her to a wide clearing in which half a dozen thatched huts surrounded a large campfire and campground filled with people. Though she had never been there herself, years of lessons were enough for Karina to recognize the vast jungle north of the Ojubai Desert, the ancestral home of the Arquatian people. In an instant, Karina forgot about Solstaja, the rite of resurrection, even the kestrel, as she caught her first glimpse of the world beyond Zeron's walls. She took a deep breath, her heart in her throat. The air smelled like sunlight and rain. This tent is completely against regulation, she muttered, rubbing the yellow petals of a hibiscus flower between her fingers. It felt as real as any she'd seen in Zeron. The outside fits the space your officials gave us, argued Efwa. They never said anything about the inside. Is that some kind of portal? Efwa nodded to the small sliver of city visible through the tent flap at the other side of the clearing. It's a side spell mixed with a perception enchantment. Efwa puffed out her chest. I fashioned it myself. When you're far from home, it helps to bring a little bit of home with you.
And cut. And this is so wonderful. I hope people got this because Afua basically brings her into the tent, and the tent is bigger on the inside than it is on the outside. Okay, so it's not like we could replicate this here in Second. I mean, we could replicate it in Second Life, but we didn't. Our tent here, our modest tent where we are assembled here, is just big enough to accommodate. Our dragon friend Misk Firethorn and a bunch of our friends, so we have enough place for dragon. And if the camera wants to zoom towards the book that you mentioned, which is so awesome because these types of artifacts, as a reader, I love these little things. The tomb of the dearly departed. We actually have a prop here that is on a Cthulhu type stand. We only had the prop department only had a Cthulhu type stand, but there's a isn't it all the same, Roseanne? Egyptian
Yeah.
folklore and Cthulhu. I mean, right? Some weirdos
Yeah.
from the deep.
Yeah, kind of something like that. It's definitely, yeah, I definitely took a lot of inspiration from the Book of the Dead from ancient Egypt. So I just kind of changed the wording a little bit.
This is a wonderful hour, and I'm going to wrap the hour, and we're going to stick around here. Please do stick around. If you saw the region full, you can try again. A few people uh, have left, so there may be room for 3, 4 more people. Thank you so much, Roseanne. Thank you a million. I hope you had a good time here with your avatar embodiment. And again, sorry that you couldn't be a hyena, that you had to be a princess. I mean, I know it's unforgiving, but
It's it's okay. Next time I'll be a princess hyena.
yes, with a nice green um, flowing dress, which was made by Solus, by the way. Big thanks.
Mhm.
And big thanks to the audience. This is the time where, and I know that Roseanne actually did put some titles already in the local chat, so we're going to save the local chat and we'll put it for people to find. Son of the Storm by Suji Davis Okungboa. Suji is coming to the book club in October, I think. Um,
Ooh.
yeah. Is there anything you would like to add now? I mean, going forward, I guess the final question for now, and again, we have you till the bottom of the hour, but this is the first part of a two-part book, right?
Yes, yes. I guess just thank you guys for having me. Thank you for the questions. It's like it's amazing because like the book's been out for like almost a year now. Actually, next week will be exactly a year. And it's just always so great, just like still seeing people just discovering it and like just having new opinions and just like just always it's always just so fun to like talk with people who love books and like who because like it's because of y'all like I get to do my job. So I just
That
love
is
that so much. So thank you.
absolutely. You know what? It's good that you mentioned it because then I do have to ask this because I find this very worrisome as a creative person myself. I find it very worrisome that we're further and further going into a world where people talk about content and people talk about content producers and people who produce content are in a hamster wheel and it's about constant consumption. I mean, this is not a new phenomenon. I mean, I've been in this for a very, very long time from the music business. And so, from a marketing standpoint, people, marketers, and publishers, they've always looked at things in a very narrow window. But I find it incredibly depressing, actually, Roseanne, when I hear people say, "Well, this book has been out for a year or two, and people are still interested in it." Of course. I mean, how do you feel about this? I know that marketers have a different job than writers, but every creative person wants to create something of lasting value, of meaning, something that is not just a commodity to be consumed like a, I mean, an artisan burger, but it's still something to be consumed,
Mhm,
something that
mhm.
that lasts, right?
Yeah, definitely. And I definitely think like for me, it's like it never really goes away because like for the rest of my career, like I get to keep talking about the book, right? But yeah, you're definitely right that like there tends to be a big focus on front list and that focus on like books that are coming out, books that are coming out. And so backlist can get kind of buried. And so
Well,
it's
this is,
always
I mean, to
amazing when
me, that looks like, I mean, to me, this is a sign, a symptom of the dominance of, again, commodifying everything and the dominance, and I'm sorry, marketers, of sort of a marketing culture that is constantly trying to feed the machine. And I actually, I would slap myself by asking you the question. This is part of two-parter. What's up with the next book? I mean, I think that that's really the worst question to ask any creative person who is proud to have produced anything. That creative person also needs to, I think, needs to get some time off and really reflect on things, and that we ask that person, rather than staying with this for a little while and reflecting and meditating on it right away, going like, okay, what's next? What's next? What's next? That, I think, is a huge problem we have in society. It's not getting better.
definitely. And I think part of it is just well, one thing that has really taken what to call that was taken to heart is that like honestly sales were up last year. Like with the pandemic and everything, book sales were up. And so like even with the like pandemic and like people were just thinking, oh, everyone's just gonna be online all the time. Like people were still reading, like readers are still out there, people are still out there. So it might take that people have to sort of really update their how we reach these readers because clearly the traditional way of reaching readers is not working as we need it to. So we need to update that. But like they're still out there and they're still buying up books. We are seeing big numbers.
That is a subject where I can, as a reader, and again with interacting as a filmmaker and a musician with marketing folks, I'm quite opinionated about that, and I think there's a lot of stuff wrong, but I don't want to
Mhm.
occupy the conversation, and we're over time. Again, we could talk a little bit in the post game, but thank you so much, Roseanne. Thank you, audience. Please do stick around for the post game. I'm gonna go through my credit slides. The show is produced by Shyla the Super Gecko, Strawberry Linden, who is not with us today, Ruby Geek, and myself. On camera today is Isabel Sharon. Big thank you. The show is every Wednesday at 12 o'clock Pacific time, and you can reach us at slbookclub@draxtor.com. I gave Ruby Geek producer credits, and she does so much that she might as well get them because she's also the location manager, the master builder, and she put the avatar together with Solus today. Big thanks, Ruby. You can tip the staff by throwing your loose Linden shekels into the little statue there. I don't know where it is. It's at the edge of the stage somewhere. Special thanks to Marianne, Arden Schwartzman, Theanine, Brett, and Patch from Linden Lab, AJ McDowell, all the moles at Linden Lab, especially Kronos Mole. We're sponsored. We're getting a lot of really cool stuff to outfit the avatars and build the sets from Bad Unicorn, Bespoke, Blueberry, Creatures, Crescendo, Landscapes Unlimited, Nomad, Rag VR, Salt and Pepper, Slink, Skin Stealer, The Black Forest, What Next, and of course, Linden Lab supplying the land. Please find the links to our calendar, Discord, and Flickr on the sandwich boards scattered about the islands, and to recommend authors and to get in touch. Like I said, slbookclub@draxtor.com or Jared the Bot. That's the avatar Jared bot. And one more time, one more time for the people in the back. Tip the staff. I know you guys have Linden dollars. You got tons of Linden dollars, and they need to go into the thing. Next week, we have two shows. We have Simon Hahn. Um, Simon Hahn is coming with a very disturbing tale about the suburbs. So you may see a suburban set again or something of the sorts. His book is Nights When Nothing Happened. He's, of course, talking about my teenage years again. And we also have on Friday Corey Doctorow and David Dane. Now, Corey is known as an author, I mean, an activist, but primarily an author of fiction. But he also wrote a book about surveillance capitalism. And David Dane is, of course, one of the greatest journalists that America has to offer today. I'm biased. And he wrote a book called Monopolized about corporate power. Good question. Jerry McNally's asking what time Friday. I actually don't know. You have to look at the calendar. I think it's 9 a.m. We had to shift it around a little bit to accommodate their schedule. But that's it, folks. Stick around. We have Roseanne for about 12 more minutes in the post game. This is it, and I'll see you all next Wednesday on the Second Life Book Club.